Hello and welcome to the 5app webinar. My name's Corey Mitchell. I'm the sales manager here at 5app, and today I'm joined by a fantastic panel of L&D experts. With me I've got Philip Huthwaite, Sophie, and also Dan and Sophia from our L&D Emerging Voices list. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on. Some slight housekeeping before I ask them to introduce themselves. We're possibly not going to have time to answer questions that you send in during the event today, because we've got lots of exciting stuff to talk about. But please do post it in the chat, in the comments, and one of my lovely colleagues will log that and we'll make sure answers get back to you after the session today. With that said, let's go to our exciting guests and ask them to do a little bit of an introduction to them of themselves. So Philip, should we start with you?
Can do indeed. Thank you, Corey. So I'm Philip Huthwaite. I'm CEO of 5app. So I head up lots of things from strategy, sales, all the way to doing the washing up. So no task is below me. We help at 5app organizations turn learning into measurable business impact. I'm personally passionate about using AI to ensure that development doesn't just happen in the classroom, but it also shows up in real work.
Lovely stuff. And over to yourself, Sophie.
So hi, I'm Sophie Costin. I'm Director of Learning at Make Real. Make Real, we're an immersive learning company. So we use interesting technologies like virtual reality, augmented reality, a lot of AI as well. But we also use immersive techniques as well. So things like storytelling and game-based designs to help people practice the skills they need to do their job.
Thank you very much. And last but certainly not least, yourself, Dan.
Thanks, Corey. Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Godfrey. My official title is Head of Learning Impact Insights and Engagement. What does that mean? That means I help our clients really understand the true impact, or even setting them up the real impact of their learning solutions. At Hemsley, we offer end-to-end learning solutions, including services, technology, and content, predominantly around learning management development programs. So what I'm there to do is to make sure we're getting the transformative change we're looking for with the clients.
Lovely stuff. Thank you all so much for joining. So the format's going to be really simple today. I'm going to ask 3 questions, potentially 4 if we have time, and then I'll just cycle around each of you just to get your thoughts and feelings on those questions. So the first one I was going to start with today is the one that I imagine lots of people have been drawn here to hear, which is what is the biggest challenge L&D is facing in 2026? And again, I'll start with yourself, Philip, to get your thoughts and insights on that.
Goodness me, start straight with the big one. Go straight in. How long have we got? So I think the biggest challenge L&D is facing in 2026 is shifting from being a delivery function to becoming what I call a strategic business partner. And that pressure is coming right from the top. So if you look at various research, such as LinkedIn's talent velocity research that has come out recently, it says that 90% of chief people officers say increasing real-time skills visibility is now a priority. And that, for me, is a very clear signal. So historically, if we look at L&D, it's measured things like attendance, completion rates, and satisfaction scores. And those metrics tell us that learning happened, but they don't tell us whether capability has improved. Boards are now asking very different questions. They're asking things like, what skills do we actually have today? Where are we exposed? How quickly can we reskill? Are we building the capabilities our strategy depends on? And if we're honest, most organizations struggle to answer those confidently. And that, I feel, is a gap. So in 2026, the expectation is therefore evidence of the behavioral change. Can we show that change management is improving? Can we show that accountability is increasing? Can we show that communication is strengthening over time, to just pick a few? The shift is from delivering programs to making skill progression visible. And I believe that is the defining challenge, but it's a challenge and it's also an opportunity for L&D to capitalize on now.
Fantastic stuff. Thank you, Philip. Over to yourself, Sophie.
Yeah, I really agree with that. So no fights this early on in the live stream. Yeah, just to really echo that. I published an article at the beginning of the year that was entitled "From Content Creators to Meaning Makers," and that's sort of where I see the L&D shift going at the moment. And what I mean by that is I think we've had this kind of tried and tested model, by and large, of creating the content that people need to learn from. Whereas now, with the advent of AI and it's starting to be embedded in our practices, actually what we really need to focus on, as you say, Philip, is that strategic function, is that creating the conditions in which people can learn, which I think is no small task. That's a challenge in itself at the best of times. And I think we can all probably agree that it hasn't been the best of times. We're coming out of a huge period of uncertainty where actually engagement and motivation is really low, which just makes that ask even bigger. But I think we are coming out of those times. I think if we look at the global sentiment survey that was published last week, I think the green shoots are there. So there's a lot of optimism and a lot of hope to be had, but the scale of the challenge shouldn't be underestimated. And for certain groups as well, like I wouldn't want to be a graduate at the moment. And the World Economic Forum published some data, it was a couple of years ago now, but that showed that women of every age group use AI less than men. And actually that's most profound in the youngest generation. And so there's some real key challenges that as these green shoots emerge, we really need to make eye contact with.
Lovely stuff. Thank you, Sophie. And yourself, Dan?
I feel a Blue Peter moment coming on. I agree with everyone. Here's what I did earlier. I think you've already set me up, both of you, kindly for this. So building on what Philip was saying is, over the last few years, we developed a lot of fantastic technologies and services across the board. And what that's allowed us to, as Philip pointed to, the L&D departments are now finally getting that seat at the table that we always deserved across the board. But as they say, with great power comes great responsibility. And the backside of being able to have that, we now need to demonstrate what it is that we're achieving. And Philip's absolutely right. We need to be doing much more than we were previously. What I'm focusing on and what we're focusing on and the challenges we see with our clients is some of them need to demonstrate impact. So not just what's happened, how are they contributing to the direction of the strategic business? So what is the business wanting to do? What is success for the business? And how is the learning function supporting that? So that's one thing. And then the second thing, so if we just to piggyback onto you, really, I wasn't going to say this, but it really resonated with me. One of the things that I'm always shouting loud about is making sure that we are engaging learners. In the corporate world, everybody's so busy. Everyone has a to-do list that never disappears. How are we prioritizing learning for them? How are we allowing learners to say, hey, I can prioritize this over this something else or something else? And that's the challenge we've always faced for such a long period of time. Just because we build it, I've got all these comic book things coming to me. Just because we build it doesn't necessarily mean they'll come, right? So we have to make sure it's provided to them in such a way that allows them to go through this fantastic solution that we've created and put in front of them.
Yeah. And measurement's such a key part of that as well, isn't it? Like, with the best will in the world, the best intention in the world, you can have a good theory, but until you measure whether that works, you just don't know what's working and what's not. So that's absolutely
exactly
this year. Yeah, for sure.
Looks like we've pulled together a very homogenous panel of people, which is
so boring, isn't it?
Great to hear. Yeah, we'll bring out the chairs later. But comic book references very welcome, Dan. So don't worry. So we've sort of highlighted the challenges. I think what's probably important to do is also share some insights and advice on how to overcome these challenges as well. Sophie, should we start with you for this one? You talked about sort of raising motivation, getting people sort of engaged with sort of learning. But how do you think they should overcome these challenges?
Yeah, how do you do that? Yeah. No, it's a big question. And I think it is about getting back to the fundamentals of what makes a good learning experience. I think the focus, quite rightly so, for a number of years now has been on the technology because there's been this huge technological shift. And, at Make Real, we're quite a shiny things company, really. We use a lot of virtual reality, augmented reality, artificial intelligence. But our mantra is very much beware shiny things. Don't use technology for technology's sake. But I think the mood music of the last few years has been let's use this technology. There's new technology. Let's just use it somehow. And I think we're finally finding our equilibrium, maybe finding our confidence a little bit more to actually get back to the basics of, okay, what makes a good learning experience, which needs to be storytelling, which needs to be sparking curiosity. I've become really fascinated with the emotion of surprise recently, because surprise is where all learning happens. You know, if something's too surprising, it's confusing, you can't learn. If something's not surprising enough, it's boring, you can't learn. So, you know, sort of actually playing with the emotional journeys of pieces is really key and critical, I think. And over the last couple of years, one of our most successful pieces was actually just a bit of storytelling. You know, we're sort of known for using immersive technology, but actually with London Stock Exchange Group, we created a piece for them on their code of conduct that was a piece of storytelling, and we increased engagement by 408%, and we were given the Gold Award for Excellence in Design of Learning Content for that. But it just goes to show that when you get that fabric right, you know, everything else sort of falls into place. And even with our, we have a sort of an AI tool that allows you to practice difficult conversations. And I've been doing a lot of research and a lot of testing to improve and to see how we can best implement that. And actually what we found is this AI can give you all this feedback, but actually some of the learners were finding that feedback quite uncomfortable because it's coming too out of the box. So I spent a lot of my last year researching what good feedback looks like. You know, what's the real theory in terms of delivering feedback so that people can hear it? How can we use this technology to make it a human delivery? And yeah, I think that's really where we're going to see the dial shift, and that's where we're going to see improvements when we get back to that human experience and using technology as an enabler. So putting it sort of second, almost, humans first. Does everyone disagree with that? Is that
I absolutely art of surprise. I think that's definitely the takeaway. Fantastic stuff. Thank you. And Dan.
So obviously, my wander in life is all about impact. So for me, this year is all about pragmatism. What I think the challenge that a lot of our clients and in the industry, and myself included, have had is not really knowing what it is that we're supposed to be measuring from the outset. And I think what we've realized through the data recently is there are two clear things that get confused quite a lot. And I think traditionally we measure learner impact. So we're measuring behavior of individual learners rather than the impact of the business. So when you're looking at behavior, which is great because that's what we're ultimately trying to do, is change behaviors. But then at the end of the course or the program, someone says, oh, how's it had a business impact? And we try and retrofit spurious data to demonstrate that it's had a business impact. So I think pragmatism is what I'm promoting this year. It is from the outset. What do we have the capability and maturity to do? If it is measuring behavior, then that's what it is. We're going to measure behavior. And then, but if we can, what we like to do with our clients where possible is at the very start of the program, we do huge discovery. We want to understand where's the business heading? What are the processes involved for that? What behaviors are required to drive the business to where it wants to go? And not until that point do we start thinking about learning objectives, or we think about the way in which we're going to deliver the training, how it's going to fit in. Although it's always going to be nigh on impossible to create a causal relationship of we invested X and we've got Y back. What we can do is close that correlative versus causation line. And that's what we're doing a lot. So what I recommend is at the very beginning of the program, decide, are we going to do behavior? How are we going to measure that behavior change of the learners? Or are we going to try and drive business? And if we are going to try and drive business impact, let's put some real time in aligning everything from the very outset. So there's no right or wrong. Some organizations will be set up for behavior. Some will be set up for business impact. It's just being decisive at the beginning, because the last thing you want to do is start trying to convince your board of Exco that you've had a business impact when you've not. They're numbers people. And I see so many clients fall down and lose credibility when they're trying to convince somebody that something's not actually happened. So pragmatism from the outset, I think, for me. Have I got time to say one more thing, Corey? Obviously, you've got me going right now. Sophie, building on what you were saying, I think that it's so important to get the engagement and the surprise element. I love that, to get that learning in place. And I think what I'm always shouting from the rooftops is, I mentioned it a little moment ago, it's the marketing of what we're doing. You need to get the business on board. You need to get the learner on board. So the learner gets this, no matter how much we wish it was true, people are not lifelong learners in the office because they're too busy, right? And what we're fighting with that is how do we carve out opportunity to do that? So one way is they need to have more than one opportunity. Unfortunately, push notifications are quite important to build culture if you don't have that learning culture. Second thing you need to do is what's in it for them and what's in it for their immediate career aspirations in their current job. So we need to think about this when we're communicating. And also, we need the leadership involved. It's like we're having a meeting today and we're discussing this, and someone made a really good example of who, if you've got an email to respond to, are you going to respond to HR or your line manager first? And it's your line manager, right? So we need to have communications coming from all over the place rather than just centralized from HR or even an automated one coming from the LMS or the LXP. You need to have something that says, this is relevant to you and it's okay for you to do it. So I think, obviously, Sophie, if we don't get the actual training right, or nobody's going to do it or stick to it or enjoy it and come back, but we have to open the door and allow people to do this and carve out the time for them. So again, sorry if I'm so passionate about that. So yeah.
I think that's fantastic. That's what it's all about. The only caveat I would say to that, Dan, is if HR are messaging you about your paycheck, then
absolutely, Corey. Absolutely.
Fantastic stuff. And last but not least, Philip.
Yeah, I was going to say, you've not met our HR manager. You need to talk to HR every time over your line manager. So I've spoken about the shift from delivering programs to making skill progression visible in my earlier response. So essentially, L&D can become that strategic partner of the business rather than what I call sort of historically maybe a delivery function. So, I come at it. My advice is sort of threefold. You need to first of all define clearly what you're looking to observe. You touched upon that, Dan. You've got to make sure that you observe the behaviour where it's happening, not just in the classroom, for example. And I'm trying to encourage people to turn how you report L&D sort of slightly differently to board level. We've spoken about already that board loves data, so we've got to talk in their language. So let's take these in turn. Firstly, what I mean by defining clearly, I'm talking about defining what matters to you, right? I always say people don't track everything. Okay, you start small, look. Track sort of 5 or 10 critical behaviors or skills that drive performance in your organization. Too much too soon gets lost in the noise. I've seen dashboards where I've had 100 things to look at and you're like, goodness me, what's the story? What do I need to look at this dashboard? You just get blind. So if communication effectiveness in improving that in your organization is the number one priority, focus on that, get the win. Don't try to do too much too soon. The second thing that I'm looking to sort of encourage businesses to do is observe real behavior. Okay, so what I mean by that, if somebody's attended an L&D course, that just tells me that they've attended a course, right? If somebody gets a good result in an assessment at the end of a training course, that just tells me, I don't know if I'm to be hypercritical, that they've got sort of good knowledge retention, for example. They might have forgotten it as soon as they leave. I always use the joke that I'm a geography graduate, but you don't want me on your pub quiz team to answer capital cities. Okay, so if somebody completes a survey to say that they've used what they've learned in a course in the workplace, again, being hypercritical, that doesn't tell me if they're implementing it correctly. So, you need to make sure the observation of L&D effectiveness for me is happening by observing real work. Are managers actually coaching more? Are leaders communicating more clearly? Are teams demonstrating stronger accountability? And this is where, technology comes in. But, to follow your point earlier, Sophie, it's got to be secondary, but it's got to support the learner in the flow of work and the business in the flow of work. So we've actually built Helix, a AI skills intelligence software, to sort of specifically address this gap. and it analyzes real workplace communication and surfaces behavioral skills patterns over time. And that allows organizations to move beyond what I refer to as sort of assumed impact to visible skill progression. And the last piece sort of advice that I'm sort of really passionate about is we've got to make sure that we report differently. Okay, certainly in L&D, we're very much, we've fallen back to always reporting on learning activity rather than reporting on how much has capability improved. So, you know, if I give an example, instead of saying like 500 people attended a leadership management course, you know, can we get access to the data and therefore report to say that leadership communication improved by sort of X% over the quarter? And this completely changes conversation on its head. And that's how, by having access to those data points and showing progression rather than activity, that's when L&D can become that strategic partner.
Fantastic stuff. Thank you. The final question we had, I think it'd be probably remiss for us not to talk about you know, the elephant in the room, which is AI, because it is going to be disrupting everything. So the sort of big question from me really is, how will each of you be using AI for learning in 2026? And Dan, we'll start off with you for this one.
Okay. Wow. What a time it is to be in L&D with AI coming through. So again, I think we've touched on this, Sophie, you did before, about how the shiny thing always comes in place. And I think we've done that with LXPs, and we've done it with, you know, LMSs. And for the last 20 years, we've been going technology as almost a shortcut to filling in the gaps of learning. And I think we've lost all that great learning theory in what we've been doing. And I think, you know, I think the key, I keep having key words here. I think augmenting is the best word. I think we should be augmenting learning theory, proven practices with AI, not leveraging it as the solution. So a good example of this is I'm a big advocate of constructivism. So I think big picture should be at the beginning, having a framework of knowledge. So the way that we kind of look at solutions, one way of doing it is there's still a place for VILTs and in-person training, and that creates that big picture, for instance. It sets that framework of the knowledge that's going to be delivered. But then this is where the AI can come in, because you've got simulations that can be used. So the learning that you've got can then be learned, and you're hanging that information on that framework. And then you go back into the office, and then you've got fabulous things like Helix, where you can use this technology to actually be measured and perform, and you can see how that's working. So it's augmenting and supplementing the theory. And then you can, again, we could go back to the things that we know work, the coaching, other things that can happen in there that can work. But again, how else can we augment with AI? With chatbots that have that exact same content that we've learned at the very outset, at the very beginning. It's all embedded throughout. So now you've got in the flow of work learning, because the chatbots link to that. So if you do have any questions, you can ask, or you go back to the simulation and try again, or you can use Helix to measure your performance. So the theory and practice is still there. It's just been augmented by that. And I'm a firm believer that that's how we should always be using technology. So like with yourself, Philip, when we develop in product, it's what is the learning premise behind this? How are we going to drive learning forward? So that's what we'll be using. And then from a purely measurement perspective, for anyone can use, everyone has access to, you know, whether it's Copilot or ChatGPT or, you know, any of them, it's qualitative data analysis is so much better now. So in those surveys in the past, where it was just a case of rate yourself 1 to 5, tell me what you've done. Have you done this? Yes or no? You can actually say, so one of the things that I implement with ours is, tell me how this impacted your objective. What was it? How did you utilize this behavior? And whether that's with line manager surveys as well, we can ask the same thing. And now we can get themes, we can get specific examples, we can create reports, and it's such a better story that we can tell now.
Yeah.
So I might have overtaken everyone else's time with that, so I apologize.
I know we've still got some time. I mean, Philip, I imagine I know what AI tools you'll be using, and we can sort of link out to some of those later on. But if you wanted to give a a quick description of what you'll be using in 2026?
Yeah, so for me, I feel like 2025 was almost like the year of content creation, right? That very much seemed like the buzz of last year. Content is already abundant and it's everywhere, and generating more of it faster is useful and powerful in its own right, but it's not truly transformative. And so to pick up sort of on what you mentioned, Dan, I feel the real opportunity is to use AI for its intelligence to augment what we're already doing. So the strategic question for me is not, how do we build learning quicker? It's how do we understand what we already have better? That is where AI becomes powerful. So I see three areas really where AI shifts from being tactical, such as content creation, to being more strategic from an intelligence perspective. So, and Dan, you've touched upon these already. So just to sort of reinforce those, one of the first things I see it being able to do is in diagnosis. So instead of guessing skills gaps through surveys or relying on self-assessment, I'm going to be using AI to analyze real interactions and communication patterns to surface where, both personally and also where team members are strong and where team members need support. And that gives L&D that data-informed starting point rather than relying on assumptions. The second piece where I'm going to be using AI certainly more and more in 2026 is what I refer to as sort of reinforcement. AI can provide those nudges, those prompts, those feedback inside actual performance moments, such as straight after a meeting or even during a meeting or after a sales conversation, and that turns development into that ongoing feedback loop. You don't have to wait until your end of year performance review to be told that you should have improved something 10 months ago from something that was observed in a meeting. You should be able to get that feedback there and then. And lastly, in measurement, and this is the biggest shift, and I mentioned this a few moments ago, if AI can analyze patterns across, for example, meetings, conversations, and collaboration, it can begin to show where key behaviors are strengthening over time. And that's where Helix, I've mentioned earlier, our skills intelligence layer, can really augment learning. So it doesn't replace learning programs, it sits alongside it, augments it, and can show you whether learning is actually being applied. And this changes the conversation, because once the capability becomes visible, it becomes manageable, and once it becomes manageable, it becomes reportable at board level. So the risk, I think, on AI is using it tactically to maybe generate slides faster or automate admin. Mm-hmm. But I think for me, the opportunity this year is really to use AI to understand capability health in real time. And that's the difference between the L&D manager or the L&D expert or equivalent just being an efficient worker to being somebody that can actually influence company decisions. You're becoming a strategic partner.
Great, thank you. And then last but not least, Sophie.
I think it's such a hard question to answer. I think it's going to become increasingly hard because it's a bit like saying to someone, what do you use the internet for? Kind of everything. And I think AI, we're going to start using it a lot more. We're going to start realizing we're using it less. Like we're going to start talking about it less. That's sort of that's been my prediction for a year or so now, and it hasn't quite come to bear yet. But I'm going to keep riding that one until it becomes true. And I think this year is the one. And I think to speak to Philip's point, absolutely, there's been this huge enthusiasm about generative AI since sort of OpenAI was unleashed in the end of 2022. But I've always been a little bit skeptical. It's part of the solution. It has use. But it does kind of raise the floor but lower the ceiling kind of thing in some instances. So its use is kind of there. But absolutely, diagnostic AI is really where certainly Make Real we've been sort of really concentrating on for a while in terms of creating immersive skills practice opportunities, the ability to have AI models that can analyze what you're saying, your tone of voice, the way you're saying it, how you're coming across, and giving you feedback on that is extremely powerful, and that's only going to become more powerful, I think, over the sort of coming years. So the research we did, we've seen that the tool we've been creating drives speed to competency by 3 times and increases confidence in a statistically significant way, so at 19% more confidence, just by being able to practice, have AI analyze what you're doing and feed that back to you in a really constructive way. has measurable real world results. And so I think we'll be continuing to lean into that over the year because, I really believe in it. I think it's powerful.
Fantastic. Well, I apologise to everyone that there weren't really any fights across the in the very homogenous.
Wait.
Exactly, but hopefully that means that everyone's feeling the same in terms of some of the challenges, how to address them, and also in their use of AI moving forwards. As I mentioned, unfortunately, we probably don't have time for any questions, but hopefully you've posted those in the comments and we will get back to you. I'm just going to quickly flash this onto the screen as well. This is a QR code, so please do feel free to have a scan of this if you want to book in time to speak to us about some of the tools that have been referenced in the session today. Please go ahead and do so. But on that note, I will thank you all panelists for joining me. Some really interesting insights there. Thank you all for watching and for your time, and hope to speak to you all soon.